Daylene seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth.
We love Daylene so much, and we want her home.
Carlson was last seen leaving a bar, then shopping at a grocery store.
At the bar, one of the men put his arm around Daylene, and Daylene brushes him off.
We basically have a bar full of possible suspects.
He told us that he went home by himself, and then he is seen on video buying a bottle of alcohol with Daylene.
He is the last person to see her. That's all we have at this moment.
We wanted to know where Daylene was. That was at the root of it all. Where is she?
Missing person report comes in for Daylene Carlson. The original report was by her aunt that she went to this bar and did not come home.
Daylene decided that she was going to go to a local bar called Finnegan's, and she had plans to meet some friends there. Daylene's aunt and her cousin heard from her a little bit through the night. Her plan was to come home, and then Daylene never showed up. My understanding is that Daylene communicated with her family very consistently, and if Daylene said, hey, I'm going to be home, then she would come home. So the fact that she had not communicated with those folks at all, that was extremely alarming.
Daylene Carlson was full of life and energy. She was from Sandpoint, Idaho, loved to explore, kind of a free spirit. She traveled the United States with a magazine crew from city to city trying to get subscriptions for a variety of magazines. So she was a person that was, I think, looking for her way in the world, but definitely enjoying her life.
When Daylene Carlson moved to Stockton, she moved in with her aunt and her cousin. And she decided she liked the community so much that she wanted to stay and she wanted to go to college here. Daylene had never gone missing in the past. So the fact that she seemingly just disappeared off the face of the earth, it did seem exceptionally unusual.
If they know anything, just it doesn't matter how little it is, that if they would please come forward, contact the police department. She's a very quiet person, but once you get to know her, she's just bubbly and she just wouldn't hurt anybody or anything. We love Daylene so much, and we want her home.
Her cousin said that Daylene had recently broken up with a boyfriend, Jacob Evangelisti. I think Jacob had some feelings about that. He wanted to remain in a relationship with Daylene, and Daylene did not. Part of the same kind of social network was Jason Gilley. Daylene and Jason were just friends, and Jason's home was kind of the party place. We learned that these young men were at the bar. Jason was there, and Jacob was there. And given the circumstances, that certainly caught our attention.
So we want to talk to the ex-boyfriend, Jacob, because he has a reason to want to maybe get back with her, or maybe he's upset.
Jacob was very willing to talk to us, and Jacob insisted that he knew nothing about Daylene's disappearance and that he was more concerned for her than anybody was. And he seemed to be very transparent and very honest. And the sense was that he was telling us the truth. Jason told us that he was at the bar and that he saw Daleen there and that the two did hang out and that they were being friendly. And as the night went on, he got a text or a call from his grandmother who relayed that Jason's son was sick and that Jason needed to come home. So according to Jason, he went to the car and he left by himself and went straight home to take care of his son who was ill. Jason told us that when he left, Daleen was still partying at the bar and he had no idea what her plans were from that point on because he went straight home and didn't see Daleen again. So there was one camera angle in the hall near the restrooms, and in that particular angle, you're able to see that Daleen is kind of milling about with a group of men. And at one point, you see one of the men put his arm around Daleen, and Daleen kind of brushes him off and steps away. And when that person who tried to kind of bring Daleen in for a hug turns around, we're able to see that it's Jason Gilley. So watching the video and really dissecting it in all the different angles, what we saw was at the very end of the night, Jason left at 12 minutes after 1 a.m. and walked out of view of the camera. And then Daleen left 3 minutes later, also right out of view of the camera. They left not necessarily right together, but in very close proximity in time. By way of text message, we learned that Daleen's plan was to leave the bar with Jason and then go to the store and get a bottle of Jägermeister and continue the party at Jason's house. Jason said that he was not with Daleen. So of course, the text messages caused more questions for us than we had answers to at that time. Because we had the information that they were reportedly going to go pick up a bottle of Jägermeister, we just looked at what a logical route would be from the bar to Jason's home. You know, what liquor stores were along that route. And so we visited several of those type of locations, which ultimately led us to a local grocery store that did sell alcohol at that hour. And through that visit, we were able to obtain surveillance footage of a couple of young folks buying a bottle of alcohol. And the surveillance footage was not great. But when the two went to the register, ultimately we end up identifying Jason and Daleen. We knew that Jason was not telling us the truth simply because he told us that he went home by himself. And that he is seen on video buying a bottle of alcohol with Daleen.
Okay, Jason's lying to us. Why is Jason lying to us? That's the question.
Jason was not present. He actually was out of town. So we spoke with his grandmother. And we specifically asked if she told Jason that he needed to come home because Jason's son was sick. And his grandmother looked at us in a kind of a puzzled way and said, no, I never did that. I don't know what you're talking about. During the search warrant at Jason's home, there were several key pieces of evidence that were located. First and foremost, we found women's underwear in Jason's bedroom, which were obviously out of place. And we also found a certain amount of marijuana in Jason's home, enough to build a case he possessed it for sale. It was ultra clear that Jason was not being honest and that we now had enough, at least based on the possession of marijuana, to take him into custody on that and have a very direct conversation with him. So on August 14th, Jason was located and he was arrested and was immediately taken into custody. Sorry about the wait, man. I don't
Like we keep,
unlike you,
like we keep saying, we got so much stuff. It's crazy.
Well, we appreciate your cooperation, by the way. I don't know if I said that. It really helps. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we really.
I understand it's all procedures. It's,
Yeah, no, we appreciate, I mean, all you're doing is helping us,
so I
so
wasn't upset about my room upside down. But, so,
we're not worried about weed or whatever. I'm just curious, to be honest with you. What is a little sack like that, what does it cost?
I've been getting $10 for them.
10 per?
Yeah, I'm not really trying to make money off it. And,
Just kind of smoke for free kind of thing?
yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so now going back to Saturday,
Saturday, it was a long, boring day. So I think I did some yard work. I can't quite remember.
You went to the bar at what time?
I would say, again, 9 or 10ish. It's about the time I show up.
I wanted Jason to lock himself into a statement. If the statement was going to be absolutely the truth, that would be great. If he chose to continue to stick to his story and tell us more lies, we were going to let him do just that.
I do remember playing beer pong, drinking some beer. I seen her Daleen there, and I seen her, like I said, bouncing. I told you before, she was bouncing around. About, let's say, a little bit before 1, grandma texted me, said, "Hey, are you busy? Can you come home and take care of your son?" All right, I will.
And then where do you go?
Straight home.
The thing that we want most is a full confession. A very close second to that is a statement that's riddled with lies. And in that interview room, Jason continued to lie.
We just want her home, safe. I just want my family to, you know, have peace and my aunt get her daughter home.
Everybody has their own kind of nuances as to how they speak, how they act. And I was just kind of getting a read on who Jason is and how he would generally communicate so that we could then identify behavior changes from that. And that's really what we're looking for, is what that behavior change is.
So what do you think about all this stuff and everything that's floating around?
Honestly, I don't even know. I know it's not good. It's sad, and I really don't know thoughts on it.
What do you think happened?
Thinking she left with somebody, and hopefully she's just stuck somewhere. Hopefully she's all right. I don't have no idea what happened. No idea.
Have you tried, since you found out she went missing, have you helped out, like, to try to find her, to do anything?
I was gonna print out some flyers, but my printer was out of ink.
Try calling her or texting her or anything?
I tried calling, but the phone dead.
But what,
Go straight to voicemail.
when did you try calling her?
Oh gosh, I couldn't even remember what day that was.
Well, I mean, has it been kind of repeatedly that you tried?
No, I tried one time. And
Oh, just
and
one.
plus everybody else, like, oh yeah, phone's off.
He was so nonchalant about, oh yeah, I don't know, maybe she's stuck somewhere, I hope she's okay. That doesn't make sense to me. For most adults, if something happened to one of their friends, they would do everything they could to try to help locate that person, particularly in the context of this case.
Is there anything else you could think of? Anything that you think that would help us out?
I'm not one to point fingers, but I mean, Jacob was just staring her down all night long, watching her every little move.
What I kind of understood, and maybe I misinterpreted, this was pretty much she broke up with him.
I don't know if it was mutual or if he broke up with her or she broke up with him. I just know she was all excited about being apart from Jacob, honestly. She was all excited.
About being apart from him?
She's like, I'm done with him, so glad it's over. I don't know what I seen in him.
Right.
Every time I looked toward his direction, he was staring at her.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I noticed that. So.
He immediately went to deflecting,
She always
bringing up reasons. Oh, she was drinking She was talking to a lot of guys. Jacob was staring at her. You know, that's an ex-boyfriend. So when people start deflecting, they're hiding something. And our goal is to know what they're hiding and why.
You know, when you have, here's the thing.
Yeah. Same ones you guys.
So nothing else you can think of? Anything you want to add on the timeline?
Anything you want to, you know, that you think that maybe you made a mistake when you're telling us? Okay.
I can think of.
Okay.
We have a ton of resources that we use,
Right.
investigative tools that we use,
Right.
and there's some inconsistencies in her story. And we want you to clear this up for us.
Really horrible times.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
And you can't expect us. We don't expect you to know every minute
Right.
of what you did.
That's not reasonable.
It's not reasonable. But that's the good thing with surveillance, video surveillance at different locations, the cameras that are on the intersections, and as such. So we don't have to account for your time, but these things
They do.
take their time spent.
What we can see is literally the wheels begin to turn in his head, right? And him beginning to recount where might I have gone that they might have surveillance footage.
So we need you to be completely honest with us.
Because-
we know a lot more of what's going on. Okay? And this is your opportunity to be completely honest with us. And we need you to be honest. Because we know a lot of information.
What you see is him kind of shift in his chair. And that's a classic tell of somebody who's beginning to feel very uncomfortable. Jason is beginning to connect the dots that we certainly know more than we revealed to him originally. And his body language said so much more than his words did.
So Jason, let's stop goofing around. Let's stop playing games, okay? Because we know that there's a whole lot more to this story, and this is not the time for games.
We just need you to be honest.
This is a big deal.
Any investigator knows if somebody is talking, you're making progress. It might be very, very slow progress. And even if he's gonna lie, the fact that he's talking, if he's talking, we're on the right path.
You're in a good position to help yourself right now.
So let's really consider some questions, and let's really consider the answers that you're giving before we go further down the road, Jason. Because I don't want you to waste this opportunity that you have right now, okay, to be honest with us. Because
Trying. I'm saying everything I can. I understand. I don't know what you guys know or anything, but
Jason, we know a lot of stuff.
And-
okay? And we need you to be honest.
please don't waste this opportunity, because this is serious, okay? So don't do that to yourself.
Me leaning in and putting my hand on his forearm there is a way for me to try to connect with him, because humans like that human touch. And if that need is being met in this way, then there's a higher likelihood, in my experience, that somebody's going to continue to talk.
So let's start over. So on Saturday, okay, what time do you get to the bar?
got to the bar probably 10:15.
Okay.
I was there until about 1 o'clock.
Okay, and what happened at 1?
At 1 o'clock, I left
Because what?
because of my son.
Okay.
So I went home, made sure my son was all right, and that was it.
Let's talk about,
Let's talk about your grandma and the text first. Because when we were out there on Thursday night, I spoke to your grandma. And I
Right.
spoke to her in detail about that.
right,
About your son being sick and all that, and she explained what she did or didn't do.
right.
And it's
Doesn't
not
quite jive.
consistent with what you're saying. So this is your opportunity to straighten it out for us.
She didn't text.
You're right, but you didn't.
You're right.
I had just went home.
Okay. Why did you not tell us the truth about that?
Went to the
What's the purpose of it?
there is no purpose.
Well, listen, people don't lie to the police for no reason, Jason.
Right.
And we asked you multiple times, and you gave the same lie over and over. And, you know,
Well, I was texting a lot. I was, you know,
who else were you texting?
I honestly could not remember who else texting.
His brain's going 800 million directions, and he's trying to come up with a new strategy because he knows his whole statement is, I left to see my son. Well, that's no longer true. So now they're just going to keep chipping away at him and have him keep contradicting himself, and then hopefully each time he'll reveal a little bit more of the truth.
So why did you decide to leave the bar?
Because I wanted to go home to my son.
Okay, so who did you leave the bar with?
Nobody. I left by myself.
And where did you go?
I went home.
From the bar directly to your house.
Didn't make any stops. Stopped nowhere.
Wait a minute. Wait. I left the bar. Okay, hold on. I left the bar with Daleen to Food for Less. I bought a bottle of Jaeger for her, dropped her back off at the bar. And then
Now, why would you lie to us about this, Jason?
I just remembered that I went to Food for
But
Less.
that's pretty important.
Jason.
You've been very detailed on everything to us.
Jason,
and you,
this is,
No, I understand.
it's not something you forget, Jason.
It was just so obviously fabricated that he just happened to remember. Oh gosh, thank you. Yeah, I forgot, but yes, now I remember.
This is not something you forget.
I understand.
So let's talk about this. This is serious.
It slipped my mind. I'm serious.
I don't think it did, Jason. As a matter of fact, I'm quite certain it didn't. Okay? There's a whole lot more to this story, and all these questions that we sat in here and asked you, we obviously knew the answers.
Yeah.
That was not a slip of the mind. That was a lie. There's a big difference. It was a lie, correct?
Yeah.
Why?
Scared.
Of what?
Because I know she disappeared around the same time.
So why would you be scared about that, Jason?
Jason clearly wasn't going to volunteer any more information, so it seemed obvious that we needed to pivot on our strategy to confront him with facts about his lies. Ultimately, we wanted to know where Daleen was. That was at the root of it all. Where is she?
Most important is we need to get Daleen back to her family. Right? So you're going to help us find her.
I don't know how I'm going to do that.
I'm sure you do. Jason, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. Why would you lie to us about having gone home by yourself?
Slipped my mind. Sorry.
Okay, what else slipped your mind until right now? What else do you want to change about your story? This is your chance. Jason,
use this opportunity.
let's talk about your conversation with Daleen leading up to going to Food for Less.
I had offered, I said, do you want to come back to the house, crash on the couch? She said, okay. It's okay, cool, I'll bought me a bottle. I had changed my mind, I bought the bottle still, and went home.
And where did you take her?
Took her back to Fence. She was with me, and I dropped her back off at Fence on the way back to my house.
So you dropped her back off in the bar? You're sure?
Shortly after 1. So we left a little bit before 1, maybe right at 1.
You're sure?
What did she do when you dropped her off?
She walked into the bar.
That's weird. Jason, you know what's weird about that? You know what's really weird about all that? There's a of people at Finn's. There's cameras everywhere. Guess what they caught at Finn's? After we, because we saw you guys live together.
Her come back into Fence.
Jason.
There's no surveillance of that.
And there's surveillance everywhere. We sat and we watched hours of footage. Jason. okay? You guys went home to your house.
No, no.
Jason,
let's
let's quit around, Jason. I'm about done with it. Got it? I'm about done.
Do I need a lawyer or something? I mean, you guys are starting to handle me. I don't understand.
Jason, listen, I apologize. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you said-
I'm sorry.
Yelling at him and cussing at him was not a successful strategy, right? And so it seemed very clear I needed to apologize and I needed to back it off. And I needed to be more of that soft touch and more like, hey, it's okay. We're here. We want to help you. This is your time.
And you're a good guy, okay? So we can make this work. We can make this okay. But you gotta be honest. Starting right now. Starting right now.
Should walk towards the bar, how far it is.
For blood, for dead bodies, for... Why don't you tell us about where you and Daleen went after Food for Less, Jason? Because it wasn't to the bar, Jason.
I'm really scared because I know when people missing, they look like you guys are looking at me. That it's the person that did it last week usually has done something.
Okay, then be honest and stop lying.
I'm sorry, I'm really scared. We went back to my house. We drank a little bit. Then she called. She started to walk off to go home. I wasn't gonna let her walk all the way home. She had been drinking a lot. So I got in my grandma's car. And I don't know how much she got in.
Why is it that you lied to everybody?
Because I know how people look at when you're the last person. Like everybody's pointing fingers at me because I think she left the bar with me.
Well, she did leave the bar with you, Jason.
Right, but now she's missing. I don't have anything to do with her missing.
Then Jason, why would you not tell us that from the get-go? Jason, because here's the problem.
I'm really scared. I'm so scared.
Things happen, man.
It's okay, okay?
Okay, she's missing.
But so let's make it better. Okay? Jason, let's make it better.
Let's make it better right now.
Okay? Let's make it better. Do the right thing, man. You're a good guy. And I know in your heart.
Let her walk.
Hey,
I'm a good guy. Let her walk away.
in your heart, I know you want to do the right thing.
I
Okay?
didn't mind it.
That's
People make
okay.
mistakes, Jason. Do the right thing now for you.
What am I supposed to do now? It's been 7 days.
The more that he becomes emotional and the more that he cries, it becomes apparent to me that these are not real tears. What we see is him beginning to get really, really worried about himself and not about Daleen. He knows that he's in serious trouble.
Jason, the more you talk about it, the better you're gonna feel.
The better you're gonna
Don't you-
feel.
Don't you feel
You gotta
relief
feel
right
better.
now?
Should be let walk.
But Jason,
Should be at home.
you gotta feel a little better about, being able to get this off your
You're able
chest.
to tell us now. You haven't been able to tell anybody.
I'll be scared. I'm get her home.
Okay,
But
hey,
get it off
hey,
your chest.
Jason, listen, because ultimately the truth is gonna come out. Ultimately, the truth will come out. Okay? And how much had you had to drink between
Between the two of us, we drink a whole bottle.
of
I
Jaeger?
should not do that.
Did you guys have sex?
No.
Jason.
Jason,
Jason.
why would you lie about that, Jason? Jason, stop lying.
Let it out now.
It's okay, man.
I let her walk away.
Jason, that's okay, man. Okay? But you gotta stop lying. Okay? Stop lying. Is that the first time you guys had sex? Was she upset because...
She said we were both drunk. It should have never happened.
Well, that's okay. Was she upset because you guys...
I think so. I didn't want to pursue it. I didn't want to.
Why do you think she was upset?
She was probably sobering it up. We had sex, and we hung out for a little bit more, and then she just said she wanted to go home. And she started walking, so I got her in the corner.
Was she in the front seat or the back seat?
She was telling me just let her go, just don't worry about her, just let her go. I figured she
Was she yelling?
I figured she was upset about the sex. I figured, you know.
What was she saying?
She was like, I'm horrible. I can't believe I did this. You're a piece of garbage.
To you?
Yeah.
Why was she saying that about you?
I don't know. Like I said,
What were you saying back?
nothing. I said, I'm just going to take you home. You'll be all right. And then she got out of the car. And I didn't want to pursue the issue, so I just do it. That's what I meant to. I should have just made sure she went home.
Jason said that they drove all the way to Modesto, which is about 30 minutes south of us, and that Daylene got out of the car at some unknown place, and instead of alerting the authorities in that community and asking for help, he just left and went to a gas station.
You were so good to try to stop her.
That's what I mean. I don't know.
She got out of the car and you didn't go around to help her?
No, I didn't. I really don't. That's why I didn't want to tell anybody.
Okay. She didn't jump out of the car, Jason. Jason.
Yeah, she did. She didn't jump out. She stepped out of the car.
Jason, she didn't step out of the car. She didn't just walk away, Jason. And you didn't just drive off. That doesn't make any sense, Jason. Because when you lie, it's great. Jason.
No.
Jason.
Jason.
Jason. Jason.
No.
Where are we going to find the body?
Help us find her.
Help
Jason.
us bring her home.
Her family deserves it,
You
dude.
have a family. She has a family.
She deserves it. I know that.
She does.
And let's
Anything to her.
come on, Jason, listen to me. You don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation, okay? When Jim
You
explains
guys
it,
are trying to make it into something I didn't do.
I don't want you, definitely don't want you to do that. Okay?
I'm sorry, you guys are just. I feel like you're making me say something that's not true.
No, we don't want to put anything in off, but no one's in off.
Yep, it's over, so
You asked for an attorney, so.
we can't talk to you at all. So here's what's gonna happen, okay? You're gonna go to jail. Okay? Jason, tonight.
Jason asking for a lawyer and our communication having to end with him was pretty devastating. As somebody who was fielding the calls from her family every single day, I wanted to know where she was.
We were looking at a no body, no cause of death investigation. There's no evidence really of his kidnap or what we believe to be murder of Daylene Carlson. We just know that she has disappeared. He is the last person to see her. He is lying about his interactions with her, but that's all we have at this moment.
Gilly was set free for lack of evidence after police arrested him soon after Carlson's disappearance. This is the only interview he's done.
Really haven't known her that long. And just to be accused of this, it really hurts.
Carlson was last seen with Gilly leaving a bar, then shopping at a grocery store. She was never seen again.
Not that person that you all see on TV. I'm a kind person. I don't push myself on anybody. Everybody that knows me knows that.
It just seemed like such a perfect opportunity to have another discussion with him about Daylene's whereabouts, but clearly I was not the right person to have that discussion with him.
Let's quit around, Jason. I'm about done with it. Got it? I'm about done.
Introducing Detective Dela Cruz to Jason was an opportunity to see how he would respond to a female investigator
He doesn't have to talk to me. He doesn't have to be there. He wasn't under arrest here, so he could really have told me to f off. What happens is you come across a lot of people. I do. You know, in the course of 20 years. And there's people that you have not empathy but I kind of feel for you, if that makes any sense.
I think so, I don't know.
Jason seems like the type of suspect that just needed to be coddled and just be reassured, as opposed to hitting him hard and him shutting down. He seemed like a nice guy.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of times I know that nice people get caught up in stuff.
That's what I'm afraid of.
That's what I'm afraid for you too, to be very honest with you.
Yeah.
Because I think you've gotten caught up in stuff, and my heart feels for you. I feel bad for you.
Right.
I think something happened. You're not someone to actually hurt somebody. I think something bad happened.
So when you watch this, he acknowledges for a minute by nodding his head. You can see that when she says, something bad happened, I think you know. And he's like, yeah. And she's trying to relay to him, you can trust me.
If anybody would want to help you on this department and be on your side, you got one person.
Right.
Okay? And I don't do that often.
I understand.
There's a lot of people that I've sat across the table from. Okay? And have done some bad things. It does not make them a bad person.
Right.
By no means. Okay?
I just don't really know. I have nothing else I can think of. Like, I've been thinking every day. I don't really know.
At that point, he just kind of like didn't budge. He just reminded me of someone that wanted to go ahead and tell the truth, but it wouldn't come out of his mouth. The written timeline was something that was beneficial for the case. We wanted to do an analysis of the events in Jason's writings. So when we get it on paper, there's one portion where he starts speaking about Daleen in past tense. That's not good. That means he did something. That means she's gone.
The condition of the body was extremely poor, so we were not able to use DNA and had to use a forensic dentist who 2 days later positively identified the remains as Daleen Carlson. Daleen had been shot 5 times, and we recovered 5 spent .22 caliber casings close proximity to her body.
To have a young gal like that that's beautiful, that has a lot going for her, to have her life cut short, it's horrible.
Prosecutors say the evidence that they were able to get once Carlson's body was discovered fits in with the timeline that they already had for the sequence of events here at Gilly's house that night. What they don't have is the murder weapon.
Through the course of this investigation, we learned who all of Jason's family was in this area. And through questioning Jason's uncle, we learned that Jason had an old .22 caliber semi-automatic handgun that he gave his uncle and told his uncle to put in a safe and keep for him.
I asked him, when did Jason give you that gun? He said, you know, Jason gave me that gun just after that girl disappeared.
We did a forensic examination of that gun in relation to the casings that were found at the scene. And through that examination, the experts were able to say that that gun that was provided to us by the uncle was the murder weapon.
Our evidence for the rape charge was Jason's statement that Daleen woke up after having sex and was extremely mad at Jason. So those were the grounds I used, and I believe was the motive for the homicide. I believe that he was worried about being accused of rape, and that was more important to him than Daleen's life.
The amount of agony that we went through every day it was harder. Every day it was not easier. It was harder and harder and harder. And I hope that he goes down. God forgive me for saying it, but I hope he does.
Jason Gilley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which I believe was the right sentence.
Following the trial, the jurors explained that this video and this interrogation was critical in their decision-making because they were able to see that his thought process and his lies were kind of the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, in his fate.
He took my daughter away.
Why take somebody else's life because of selfishness?
My dad got justice, and she can rest now. She's been along 2.5 years. She didn't deserve any of this. She had her whole life ahead of her.
One of the saddest parts of this case is the fact that Daleen's life ended so tragically and so prematurely and left so many people absolutely, completely devastated.
After 37 years, the hotel killer was finally unmasked the murder of Diane Augat. There are crimes that fade into yellowed newspaper archives, buried beneath decades of newer headlines, and then there are cases that refuse to die. They linger in empty motel rooms, in forgotten police files stacked beneath layers of dust, in unanswered phone calls replayed over and over by investigators who never stopped listening for something they might have missed. Some murders leave behind bloodstains. Others leave behind silence. And silence can be far more terrifying. On an ordinary winter morning in Florida, the silence surrounding Diane Augat was broken by something so disturbing that even veteran detectives struggled to describe it without pausing. A plastic bag, a roadside, human remains inside. No explanation. No witness willing to step forward. No obvious suspect. Just one horrifying discovery that transformed a missing person investigation into one of the state's most haunting unsolved murder cases. For years, rumors would spread faster than facts. Some claimed the killer had been watching her for weeks. Others whispered that organized criminals were involved. A few insisted the truth had always been hiding in plain sight. Yet every theory eventually collapsed under the same crushing weight. There was never enough evidence to prove what really happened. Long before the headlines, before television crews arrived, before detectives pinned photographs across investigation boards, Diane Augat was simply another resident trying to navigate life in Pasco County. Friends described a woman who had experienced difficult chapters, but remained recognizable to those who cared about her. Like countless people whose names later became associated with tragedy, she never imagined that ordinary routines could suddenly become the opening pages of a mystery stretching across generations. The community surrounding her was the kind of place where people noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked too long along quiet streets, where convenience stores served as neighborhood gathering points, where motel parking lots appeared unremarkable until investigators began asking uncomfortable questions. It was not the sort of environment where residents expected to become characters in a crime story that would outlive entire careers in law enforcement. Everything changed during the final days before Diane disappeared. The timeline, even after years of investigation, remained frustratingly incomplete. Detectives reconstructed movements from scattered witness statements, fragmented memories, and documented sightings. Every confirmed minute became precious because every missing hour created another opportunity for the truth to vanish. At first, nothing seemed extraordinary. No dramatic confrontation. No public argument. No desperate plea for help. Just ordinary moments slipping quietly toward catastrophe. When family members and acquaintances realized they had not heard from Diane, concern slowly replaced routine expectation. People disappear for many reasons. They leave unexpectedly. They travel without notice. They avoid contact during difficult periods in life. Investigators initially have to consider every possibility before concluding something far darker has occurred. But there were details that refused to fit. Personal belongings remained behind. Planned activities went unfinished. People expecting to hear from her received only silence. Each unanswered question increased the urgency. Law enforcement officers began interviewing anyone connected to her recent movements: friends, neighbors, employees at businesses she had visited, individuals whose names surfaced through casual conversations. Every interview produced another piece of the puzzle, yet the overall picture somehow became even more confusing. Someone believed they had seen her walking alone. Another thought she entered a vehicle. Someone else could not remember whether the sighting occurred that day or the previous afternoon. Memory, detectives know better than anyone, is both indispensable and deeply unreliable. Days turned into weeks. Search efforts expanded. Missing person flyers appeared throughout the community. Phones rang inside sheriff's offices with anonymous tips that led nowhere. Every reported sighting dissolved upon closer examination. Hope gradually collided with reality. Then came the discovery that would redefine everything. The call reaching authorities described suspicious remains found near a roadway. Officers responding to the scene quickly realized they were no longer dealing with uncertainty about whether Diane was alive. They were standing inside a homicide investigation. Crime scene technicians moved methodically, documenting every inch of the location. Photographs, measurements, evidence markers, soil samples. Every procedure followed with painstaking precision because investigators understood something critical. Once a crime scene is disturbed, mistakes cannot be undone. Yet despite exhaustive forensic work, the location raised more questions than answers. It did not appear to be the place where the murder occurred. Instead, detectives increasingly suspected it represented only one stop in a far more complicated sequence of events. Someone had transported evidence. Someone had made deliberate decisions. Someone believed distance would separate the victim from the truth. Experienced investigators immediately recognized what that suggested. Planning, control, confidence, perhaps even familiarity with law enforcement techniques. Cases involving transported remains often reveal offenders attempting to manipulate investigations, forcing detectives to search one location while the real answers remain hidden somewhere else. That possibility transformed the investigation overnight. Instead of searching one crime scene, authorities now had to identify multiple unknown locations connected by invisible threads. Where had Diane spent her final hours? Where had she encountered her killer? Who saw something unusual without realizing its importance? Every unanswered question multiplied into several more. The investigation intensified. Telephone records were examined where available. Witness interviews were repeated. Known associates received additional scrutiny. Potential suspects emerged only to disappear after alibis withstood examination. Detectives often describe homicide investigations as assembling a jigsaw puzzle while someone keeps removing pieces from the table. The Diane Augat investigation seemed even worse. It was as though investigators had several different puzzles mixed together without knowing whether any belonged in the same box. Public anxiety continued growing. Residents locked doors earlier. Parents became more cautious. Conversations inside restaurants, grocery stores, and gas stations inevitably returned to the same frightening topic. Who could commit such a crime? And if that person remained free, who might become the next victim? Media coverage intensified. Every broadcast repeated familiar words. Cold trail. Mysterious disappearance. Grisly discovery. No arrests. Those phrases echoed across television screens and newspaper headlines, keeping public attention fixed on a case producing almost no visible progress. Behind closed doors, however, investigators refused to surrender. Evidence collected from the scene underwent laboratory examination. Forensic specialists searched for fingerprints, fibers, biological traces, and anything capable of identifying whoever had crossed paths with Diane during her final hours. Science offered possibilities. But science has limits. Especially during the late 20th century, when many forensic techniques that are routine today either did not exist or lacked the sensitivity investigators now take for granted. A single overlooked hair. A microscopic fiber. A partial biological sample. Modern technology might transform such evidence into decisive proof. Back then, those same traces could remain silent forever. Every detective working the case understood the cruel reality. The killer needed only one successful escape. Investigators had to be right every single time. As interviews expanded, certain names inevitably attracted attention. People who had crossed paths with Diane shortly before she vanished. Individuals whose accounts appeared inconsistent. Others who seemed unusually interested in the investigation itself. Detectives followed those leads carefully, but suspicion alone is never evidence. Time after time, inquiries reached dead ends, leaving officers with little more than intuition and frustration. The emotional toll spread beyond the investigative team. Families waited beside telephones hoping for updates. Friends replayed their last conversations, wondering whether some overlooked sentence had carried hidden meaning. Community members questioned whether they had unknowingly walked past the truth without recognizing it. One ordinary memory. One forgotten face. One vehicle parked in the wrong place. Sometimes entire murder investigations hinge on details that seemed meaningless until years later. The passage of time became both enemy and ally. Witnesses forgot. Physical evidence deteriorated. Memories blurred. But guilt has a peculiar habit of surviving far longer than confidence. People change. Relationships collapse. Secrets become harder to carry. Detectives often solve decades-old cases because someone eventually decides that silence has become unbearable. No one knew whether that day would ever arrive. For the moment, the investigation remained trapped between determination and uncertainty. Every file expanded. Every theory demanded testing. Every promising lead dissolved before reaching certainty. Outside the sheriff's office, life continued. Traffic flowed through familiar intersections. Businesses opened every morning. Children walked to school. Visitors checked into roadside motels without imagining investigators quietly examining guest records from years earlier. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of daily life, one unsettling reality persisted. Somewhere, someone knew exactly what happened to Diane Augat. Someone had watched the investigation unfold. Someone had listened as television anchors repeated the mystery night after night. Someone had seen detectives searching, interviewing, reconstructing timelines, and still remained silent. Whether motivated by fear, loyalty, or calculated self-preservation, that silence became one of the most powerful accomplices any killer could ever possess. As weeks turned into months, the case slowly began its transformation from active headline to enduring mystery. But for the investigators assigned to it, there was no convenient ending, no satisfying conclusion, no courtroom verdict waiting just beyond the next interview. There was only another morning, another stack of reports, another unanswered question, and the growing realization that the person responsible had managed to disappear into the background, leaving behind nothing but fragments, speculation, and a trail that seemed to fade with every passing season. Even so, buried somewhere inside those fragments, investigators believed the truth still existed. It had not vanished. It had only been hidden well enough to survive the years. The challenge was no longer simply finding a killer. The challenge was discovering whether time itself had become the final witness. The first 72 hours after a disappearance are often described by investigators as the narrowest window between uncertainty and truth. In that brief span, memories are still fresh, surveillance, if any exists, is less likely to have vanished, and witnesses are more willing to believe that the smallest detail could matter. Once those hours pass, time begins working for the offender instead of the detectives. In Diane Augat's case, that shift came quickly, and every day that followed made the search for answers more difficult. Detectives started where every homicide investigation begins, with the victim. Not because they believed Diane was responsible for what happened to her, but because understanding the final days of a person's life is often the fastest route toward identifying the person who ended it. They examined her routines, retraced her known movements, and spoke with people who had seen her shortly before she disappeared. Every conversation was carefully documented. Every recollection was compared against another. The goal was simple in theory and painfully difficult in practice: establish a timeline that could survive scrutiny. The timeline refused to cooperate. Some witnesses were confident about where they had seen Diane. Others admitted that the dates had begun to blur together. A familiar face glimpsed outside a convenience store could easily become attached to the wrong afternoon. A passing conversation might have occurred on Monday, or perhaps Wednesday. Investigators knew memory was fragile, especially when ordinary moments suddenly became evidence. Still, fragments slowly emerged. Diane had been seen in familiar places. She had interacted with people who knew her. Nothing about those encounters suggested that a violent confrontation was imminent. There were no widely reported public arguments. No confirmed reports of anyone forcing her into a vehicle. No obvious indication that she sensed immediate danger. That absence of clear warning signs frustrated detectives as much as it unsettled the community. Violent crimes often leave behind chaos. This one left behind questions. As investigators expanded their interviews, they cast a deliberately wide net. Friends, relatives, acquaintances, neighbors, and anyone who had crossed paths with Diane in the days before she vanished became part of the inquiry. Detectives were careful not to treat coincidence as guilt. A familiar name appearing multiple times in witness interviews might simply reflect how closely connected people were within the community. Even so, patterns mattered.
Who had seen her last?
Who expected to hear from her, but never did? Who offered information before investigators even asked? Experienced detectives understand that the way people respond to tragedy can sometimes reveal as much as the facts themselves. Some become withdrawn. Others speak constantly. Some volunteer details no one requested. Most of those behaviors have perfectly innocent explanations. Occasionally, however, they point investigators toward conversations worth having again. Again and again, interviews were repeated. The same questions. The same locations. The same sequence of events. Investigators hoped that repetition would expose inconsistencies or uncover forgotten details. Sometimes it did. A witness might suddenly remember an unfamiliar vehicle parked nearby. Another might recall seeing someone standing alone who seemed strangely out of place. Individually, those details appeared insignificant. Together, they hinted that someone had moved through Diane's world without attracting attention. Attention then turned to physical evidence. Crime scene technicians had documented every recoverable trace from the locations connected to the investigation. Clothing, fibers, biological material, and other forensic evidence were preserved using the standards available at the time. Detectives understood that forensic science was evolving rapidly. Evidence that seemed inconclusive in one decade could become decisive in another. That realization shaped an important decision: preserve everything. It was a decision that would prove critical in countless cold cases across the country. But preservation alone does not solve murders. Evidence must eventually connect to a person. And that connection remained elusive. As weeks became months, rumors spread faster than verified information. Residents exchanged theories across kitchen tables and in grocery store parking lots. Some believed the killer had been someone Diane knew. Others insisted the crime bore the hallmarks of a stranger passing through the area. Every new rumor generated fresh phone calls to investigators, each requiring time and careful evaluation. Most produced nothing. Anonymous tips are both a blessing and a burden. Occasionally, they identify overlooked witnesses or forgotten events. More often, they reflect speculation, misunderstanding, or attempts to insert oneself into a high-profile investigation. Detectives had to separate possibility from probability without dismissing information that might later become important. The emotional strain inside the investigative team steadily increased. Homicide detectives rarely work a single case in isolation. New investigations continued arriving while the Agat file remained open. Each morning demanded attention to fresh crimes without abandoning older ones. Yet certain cases linger in the minds of investigators long after the paperwork is filed away. This was becoming one of them. The evidence suggested planning. Whether the offender had carefully prepared or simply reacted quickly after the crime remained uncertain. What investigators increasingly believed, however, was that someone had made deliberate efforts to delay discovery and complicate the investigation. Those decisions bought time. Time to leave. Time to destroy evidence. Time to construct explanations. Every passing week widened that advantage. Investigators explored numerous possibilities. Did the offender have a connection to the local area? Had the crime been opportunistic, or had Diane been specifically targeted? Could multiple people have been involved after the killing? None of those questions carried simple answers. One possibility remained particularly troubling. If the offender was someone familiar with the community, that person could quietly observe the investigation while blending into everyday life. Detectives often remind themselves that killers sometimes attend vigils, speak with reporters, or even volunteer information to police. Remaining close to an investigation can provide reassurance that suspicion is moving elsewhere. There was no public evidence that such behavior occurred here. But investigators could not ignore the possibility. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science were beginning to reshape criminal investigations nationwide. DNA analysis, still developing during the late 20th century, promised capabilities that earlier generations of detectives could scarcely imagine. Cases once considered impossible suddenly seemed capable of producing answers years later, provided the evidence had been preserved correctly. That prospect offered cautious optimism. Files that appeared exhausted were no longer truly closed. They were waiting for technology to catch up. Waiting for one overlooked sample to reveal something hidden for decades. The community, however, lived in the present. For Diane's family and those who cared about her, the passage of time brought no comfort. Birthdays arrived. Holidays passed. Familiar routines continued without the person whose absence had become impossible to ignore. Every anniversary of the case reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Investigators understood that frustration. Families often asked the same difficult questions. Is there a suspect? Has anything new been found? Will this case ever be solved? The honest answers were rarely satisfying. There were persons of interest examined over the years. There were investigative leads. There were forensic reviews. But evidence sufficient to identify and prosecute a killer remained beyond reach. Despite that reality, detectives refused to abandon the case entirely. Periodically, files were revisited. Witness statements were reviewed with fresh eyes. New investigators examined old evidence, sometimes noticing connections overlooked years earlier. A different perspective can expose assumptions that had quietly shaped an investigation from the beginning. Cold cases survive because persistence survives. Sometimes a retired detective remembers an overlooked conversation. Sometimes a former witness finally decides to speak. Sometimes science succeeds where interviews failed. Those possibilities kept the investigation alive, even when public attention faded. Yet one question remained impossible to escape. Someone had taken Diane's life. Someone had returned to ordinary existence afterward. That individual may have gone to work the next morning, may have spoken with neighbors, may have watched evening news reports describing the investigation. Perhaps they even felt confident that the truth had disappeared forever. History has repeatedly shown that such confidence can be misplaced. Across the United States, decades-old homicide investigations have been reopened as forensic methods improved and investigators re-examined forgotten evidence. Cases once considered unsolvable have ended with arrests many years after the crimes occurred. Those successes transformed the philosophy of cold case work. Time was no longer viewed solely as an obstacle. Sometimes it became an investigative tool. Relationships changed. People moved away. Loyalties weakened. Memories surfaced. Technology advanced. The passage of years altered almost everything except the evidence itself. Somewhere within the Augat investigation, detectives believed the missing connection still existed. Perhaps it was hidden inside an overlooked interview. Perhaps it rested inside preserved forensic material awaiting more sophisticated analysis. Or perhaps it remained locked inside the memory of someone who had chosen silence decades earlier. Whatever the answer, investigators understood one enduring principle of homicide work. Murder creates two separate battles. The first is against the unknown offender. The second is against time. In Diane Augat's case, time appeared to be winning. For now. The investigation settled into a rhythm that every homicide detective dreads. The urgency never disappeared, but the momentum did. Patrol officers stopped asking for daily updates. Television crews moved on to newer tragedies. The phones that had once rung constantly with tips became quieter, then quieter still. Yet inside filing cabinets and evidence lockers, the case remained stubbornly alive, refusing to become just another number in an annual report. For the detectives assigned to Diane Augat's murder, the challenge had changed. The question was no longer how to solve the crime within days or weeks. It had become how to prevent the truth from disappearing beneath the weight of time itself. Cold cases are rarely defined by a complete absence of evidence. More often, they are defined by evidence that refuses to point in only one direction. That was the problem here. Every confirmed fact generated multiple possible explanations. Every promising lead seemed capable of supporting two entirely different theories. Investigators revisited the earliest interviews, not because they believed the original detectives had failed, but because experience teaches an important lesson. A witness statement rarely changes. The meaning of that statement sometimes does. One detective might focus on a vehicle. Another notices the timing. A third becomes interested in what was never mentioned at all. Silence can carry its own significance. As the files were reopened, investigators spread photographs, interview transcripts, handwritten notes, and maps across conference tables. They reconstructed Diane's known movements one more time, tracing familiar streets and ordinary locations that had suddenly become part of an enduring mystery. The exercise revealed something investigators had long understood, but could never fully explain. The timeline still contained gaps. Not minutes. Hours. Entire stretches of time remained unaccounted for. Somewhere within those missing hours lay the answer to nearly every important question. Where had Diane gone? Who had she met? Was she with someone she trusted, or had an unexpected encounter altered the course of her day? No amount of careful review could eliminate those unknowns. Detectives therefore shifted their attention to behavior rather than chronology. Violent offenders, regardless of motive, often leave behind patterns. Those patterns are not always dramatic. Sometimes they appear in the way evidence is handled. Sometimes they emerge through the selection of a location. Sometimes they reveal themselves in what the offender chose not to do. The disposal of Diane's remains suggested deliberation. Investigators believed that much was clear. Whether the decisions reflected careful planning or hurried improvisation remained uncertain, but they did not appear entirely random. Whoever was responsible had taken actions that complicated the investigation, forcing detectives to separate the location where evidence was found from the place where the crime itself may have occurred. That distinction mattered enormously. A secondary crime scene rarely tells the whole story. It only hints at it. The primary scene, the place where violence actually unfolded, often contains the evidence capable of identifying an offender. Without knowing where that location was, investigators were forced to build theories from incomplete information. Those theories evolved over time. One possibility suggested that Diane encountered someone she already knew. Familiarity can lower defenses. It can explain why a victim willingly enters a vehicle or visits an unfamiliar location without signaling distress. Another possibility pointed toward a chance encounter. Not every homicide begins with a plan. Some begin with opportunity. A brief interaction. An argument. A decision made in seconds that changes countless lives forever. Detectives resisted becoming attached to either explanation. Experience had taught them that certainty, when unsupported by evidence, can become one of the greatest obstacles in an investigation. Every assumption had to earn its place. Meanwhile, forensic technology continued advancing. Techniques once considered experimental gradually became accepted investigative tools. Biological evidence that previously yielded little information could now be examined with greater precision. Investigators across the United States began reopening evidence collected decades earlier, hoping that scientific progress might accomplish what years of interviews had not. The Augat case remained among those carefully preserved. Evidence was reviewed, cataloged, protected. Not because detectives knew it would eventually provide answers, but because they understood that destroying uncertainty was impossible if the evidence itself no longer existed. The philosophy of homicide investigation had changed. Cases no longer expired simply because time had passed. They waited. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for generations. Outside the investigation, however, the community remembered the case differently. For longtime residents, Diane's name became part of local history, a tragedy discussed whenever another disappearance made headlines. Parents who had once warned their children about strangers grew older. Those children became adults with families of their own. Some barely remembered the original news reports. Others remembered exactly where they were when they first heard them. Memory evolves. Facts remain. At least the facts that can be proven. That distinction became increasingly important as speculation spread. Cold cases naturally attract theories. Some emerge from genuine attempts to understand the unknown. Others are built upon coincidence, rumor, or fragments of truth stretched beyond recognition. Investigators reviewed many such claims over the years. Some alleged that a particular individual had behaved suspiciously. Others insisted someone had confessed privately. A few claimed to possess inside knowledge unavailable to the public. Each assertion required careful evaluation. Very few survived scrutiny. This process often frustrates observers. Why not arrest the person everyone seems to suspect? The answer lies at the heart of criminal justice. Suspicion is not proof. Investigators may privately believe one theory appears stronger than another, but belief alone cannot sustain a prosecution. Evidence must withstand examination in court, where every conclusion is challenged and every assumption questioned. Without that foundation, an arrest risks replacing one injustice with another. For Diane's family, those legal realities offered little comfort. Years continued passing without the certainty they deserved. Questions remained unanswered. Birthdays became anniversaries. Anniversaries became decades. Hope changed shape. It no longer depended upon immediate breakthroughs. Instead, it rested upon persistence. Some detective, someday, might notice what everyone else had overlooked. That possibility sustained the investigation. Within law enforcement, the case also served another purpose. It became a reminder that unresolved crimes continue affecting the living long after public attention disappears. Every unsolved homicide leaves behind more than unanswered questions. It leaves unfinished grief, interrupted futures, and communities forced to coexist with uncertainty. That uncertainty shaped every decision investigators made. Whenever new forensic methods emerged, evidence was reconsidered. Whenever fresh information reached the sheriff's office, no matter how small, detectives evaluated whether it fit within the established timeline. Most additions changed nothing. Occasionally, however, they clarified details once obscured by conflicting accounts. The investigation advanced not through dramatic revelations, but through incremental understanding. One corrected date. One clarified statement. One eliminated possibility. Progress in cold cases is often measured by what investigators can confidently exclude. Slowly, the field of uncertainty narrows. What remains becomes increasingly significant. Yet one obstacle continued overshadowing every development. The passage of time had transformed witnesses as much as evidence. People relocated. Names changed. Health declined. Some individuals who had participated in the earliest interviews were no longer available to answer additional questions. Others remembered less with each passing year, not because they wished to hide the truth, but because ordinary memories naturally fade. Detectives compensated by relying more heavily on documented records than recollection. Reports written closest to the events often became more reliable than interviews conducted decades later. Paper remembered what people could not. Even so, no document could answer the central mystery. Who was responsible? That question remained untouched. Somewhere, investigators believed another person shared the answer. Perhaps knowingly. Perhaps unknowingly. A witness who dismissed an unfamiliar vehicle as unimportant. A friend who remembered an unusual conversation only years later. Someone who noticed behavior that seemed ordinary until viewed through the lens of murder. History has shown that cold cases are sometimes solved not because new evidence appears, but because old evidence is finally understood. The difference is subtle. Yet it has changed the outcome of countless investigations. As another year passed, Diane Augat's case remained officially open. The file had grown thicker. The evidence had been preserved. The theories had become more refined. But refinement is not resolution. Investigators were still searching for the single connection capable of transforming suspicion into certainty. Somewhere beyond the reports, beyond the laboratory examinations, beyond every carefully reconstructed timeline, the truth continued to exist exactly as it had on the day the crime occurred, unchanged by rumor, untouched by speculation, waiting for someone or something to bring it fully into the light. Until then, the case would endure in the way all unresolved homicides do, not as a forgotten story, but as a question that refused to stop asking itself. Years have a way of changing everything except the facts. Buildings are demolished. Businesses close. Roads are widened. Neighborhoods expand. Faces grow older. Memories soften, and the urgency that once dominated newspaper headlines quietly fades into the background. Yet inside evidence lockers, time stands still. A sealed envelope collected decades earlier is exactly as it was on the day it was cataloged. A photograph never forgets. A fingerprint never changes. The challenge is not preserving the evidence, it is finding the moment when that evidence finally begins to speak. By the time Diane Augat's case entered its second decade without an arrest, investigators had accepted a difficult reality. The original investigation had exhausted the most obvious avenues. Hundreds of hours had been spent interviewing witnesses, reviewing reports, comparing statements, and following leads that seemed promising before collapsing under closer examination. Every detective who inherited the file faced the same question. What had everyone else missed? Cold case investigations rarely begin with dramatic discoveries. More often, they begin with patience. A detective clears a conference table, opens storage boxes that have not been touched in years, and starts reading. Every report, every photograph, every handwritten note. Not looking for something spectacular, but searching for something ordinary that no longer fits. It is remarkable how differently a case can appear after 20 years. An interview that once seemed routine may suddenly raise new questions. A witness once considered insignificant may become unexpectedly important after another piece of information is discovered. Even the order in which reports are read can influence how investigators understand the sequence of events. Fresh eyes do not create new evidence. They create new perspectives. That philosophy guided each review of Diane Augat's murder. Detectives reconstructed the investigation from the beginning, resisting the temptation to skip ahead to familiar conclusions. They studied the earliest witness interviews, paying close attention not only to what people remembered but to what they were never asked. Investigative standards evolve over time. Questions considered unimportant in one decade often become central in another. Technology had changed as well. When Diane disappeared, forensic science was still developing many of the techniques that today are considered standard. DNA analysis, digital databases, computerized comparisons. These innovations transformed homicide investigations across the United States. Evidence that once yielded little information suddenly possessed new investigative value. For law enforcement agencies nationwide, this technological revolution produced remarkable results. Cases that had remained unsolved for 20, 30, even 40 years were reopened. Biological evidence was retested. Unknown fingerprints were entered into expanding databases. Detectives who had retired decades earlier received unexpected phone calls informing them that an old investigation was alive again. Those successes inspired hope. But hope alone does not solve a murder. Evidence must still exist. It must still be suitable for examination. And most importantly, it must connect to someone. Investigators carefully reviewed every item preserved from the Augat case. Modern forensic laboratories could often detect traces that earlier examinations had been unable to identify. Even the smallest fragment of biological material had the potential to become significant. Still, scientific progress has limitations. If crucial evidence was never collected, no laboratory can recover what has already been lost. If a crime scene had been unknowingly contaminated before investigators arrived, decades of technological advancement could not reverse that damage. Every cold case carries these invisible constraints. The detectives understood this better than anyone. That reality forced them to think beyond physical evidence. Behavior became the next area of focus. Criminal investigations frequently rely upon patterns, particularly when direct evidence remains limited. Detectives asked whether the circumstances surrounding Diane's disappearance resembled other violent crimes reported during that period. Similar methods, similar locations, similar victim profiles. These comparisons demanded caution. Coincidence is common. Similarity is not proof. Yet investigators know that offenders sometimes repeat behaviors, consciously or unconsciously, creating patterns that only become visible after years of careful analysis. The search extended beyond county lines. Information was shared with neighboring jurisdictions. Detectives communicated with agencies responsible for investigating other unsolved homicides and disappearances. The possibility that separate cases might somehow intersect could not be ignored, even if no definitive connection could be established. Most comparisons ended without confirmation, but each one eliminated another possibility. As important as forensic evidence and investigative strategy were, another challenge quietly grew with every passing year. Memory. Human memory is not a recording. It changes. Details disappear. Confidence often increases even as accuracy declines. Witnesses who once recalled events clearly found themselves struggling to separate direct observation from years of media coverage and community discussion. Stories repeated often enough begin to feel like personal memories, even when they are not. Detectives compensated by relying heavily upon contemporaneous records. Statements taken closest to the event generally carried greater weight than recollections offered decades later. Original reports became invaluable. They preserved details exactly as witnesses described them before speculation and hindsight had the opportunity to reshape them. Among investigators, one principle remained constant. Assume nothing. Question everything. Every accepted conclusion deserved to be challenged. Every overlooked possibility deserved another look. This disciplined skepticism distinguished professional investigation from public speculation. Outside law enforcement, however, speculation flourished. Books, newspaper retrospectives, local conversations, and eventually internet discussions introduced countless theories regarding Diane's murder. Some were thoughtful attempts to understand an enduring mystery. Others relied almost entirely upon rumor. As the years passed, separating documented fact from repeated assumption became increasingly difficult. Investigators remained focused on what could actually be verified. Verified timelines. Verified evidence. Verified witness statements. The difference mattered. Cold cases have occasionally been damaged by well-intentioned but inaccurate information spreading through communities. False certainty can discourage legitimate witnesses from coming forward. People assume investigators already know something they do not, or conclude their own observations are too insignificant to matter. In reality, homicide detectives often solve cases because someone finally reports what seemed unimportant years earlier. A brief conversation. An unusual vehicle. An unexpected absence. Details overlooked individually can become decisive collectively. For Diane's family, every anniversary reopened familiar wounds. Each passing year represented another year without accountability. Another year without complete answers. Another reminder that justice delayed can feel painfully close to justice denied. Investigators recognized that burden. Many detectives assigned to long-term homicide investigations describe an unspoken responsibility, not only to identify the offender, but to ensure the victim is remembered as more than a case number. Files contain evidence. Families carry memories. Those two realities exist side by side. By now, several generations of investigators had contributed to the Augat case. Officers who first responded to the original investigation had retired. Younger detectives inherited boxes of reports prepared before some of them had even entered law enforcement. Institutional knowledge became as valuable as physical evidence. Veteran investigators shared insights unavailable in written reports. Why certain leads had been eliminated. Why specific witnesses required careful interpretation. Which investigative decisions reflected evidence rather than assumption. These conversations helped preserve context that paperwork alone could never fully capture. Despite every review, every interview, and every advancement in forensic science, one fact remained unchanged. The person responsible for Diane Augat's death had never been publicly identified through sufficient evidence to support criminal prosecution. That absence of resolution did not mean the investigation lacked direction. It meant the final piece remained missing. Somewhere beyond the documented record lay the connection capable of transforming decades of uncertainty into certainty. Whether that connection would emerge through science, through renewed witness cooperation, or through information that had remained hidden for years was impossible to predict. History offered reason for cautious optimism. Across the country, homicide cases once considered impossible have eventually reached courtroom verdicts after decades of silence. Those investigations succeeded because detectives refused to confuse the passage of time with the disappearance of truth. Truth does not expire. It waits. Sometimes patiently. Sometimes silently. Always unchanged. And somewhere within the thousands of pages documenting Diane Augat's final days, investigators continued believing that unchanged truth still existed, waiting for the one discovery that would finally allow it to be heard. The longer a homicide remains unsolved, the more the investigation shifts from chasing immediate leads to preserving possibility. Every unanswered question becomes something detectives hope the future can answer. Every piece of evidence becomes an investment in technology that may not yet exist. In Diane Augat's case, that philosophy shaped the years that followed. The file did not gather dust because investigators had given up. It remained intact because they understood that today's dead end could become tomorrow's breakthrough. By the late 1990s and into the following decades, criminal investigations across the United States were undergoing a quiet transformation. DNA analysis became increasingly sophisticated. National databases expanded. Evidence that once seemed too limited for meaningful examination could sometimes produce investigative leads. Cold case units emerged in many jurisdictions, built around a simple but powerful belief: time changes cases. Sometimes it changes them enough to solve them. The detectives reviewing Diane's case approached it with that mindset. They were no longer confined to the assumptions that had shaped the original investigation. Instead, they asked a different set of questions. If this murder occurred today, what would investigators do differently? That exercise proved valuable. Modern homicide investigations rely heavily on structured timelines, digital mapping, comprehensive forensic documentation, and interagency information sharing. While many of those practices existed in earlier forms during the original investigation, decades of refinement had made them significantly more effective. Revisiting older evidence through the lens of contemporary investigative methods occasionally revealed opportunities that had previously gone unnoticed. Every item collected from the case was reconsidered. Could biological evidence benefit from improved testing? Had all physical evidence been examined using today's standards? Were there investigative avenues unavailable when the crime first occurred? These questions did not imply mistakes had been made. They reflected progress. Science evolves. Investigative methods evolve. Criminal behavior, however, often remains remarkably consistent. Experienced detectives know that offenders leave behind patterns whether they intend to or not. Those patterns may involve geography, victim selection, post-offense behavior, or communication. While no publicly confirmed evidence has established that Diane's murder formed part of a broader series, investigators nevertheless examined the possibility that similarities might exist with other unresolved violent crimes. The process required extraordinary caution. Two crimes can appear nearly identical while having completely unrelated offenders. Conversely, crimes committed by the same individual may initially appear unrelated because circumstances differ. Detectives therefore focused on objective similarities rather than speculation. Locations. Timing. Methods. Victimology. Every comparison had to be supported by evidence. Some inquiries reached neighboring jurisdictions. Others extended farther as investigators reviewed reports of unsolved disappearances and homicides from comparable periods. Information sharing between agencies had improved dramatically since the original investigation, making it easier to identify potential links that once might have remained hidden. Most comparisons ended inconclusively. That outcome disappointed investigators, but also narrowed the field of possibilities. Eliminating incorrect theories is an essential part of solving complex cases. Attention also returned repeatedly to Diane herself. Not because detectives believed the victim held responsibility for the crime, but because understanding a person's life often illuminates the circumstances surrounding their death. Investigators sought to build the fullest possible picture of her final weeks. They reviewed documented routines, known associates, and confirmed activities, separating verified information from rumor wherever possible. Victimology is a cornerstone of homicide investigation. It asks practical questions. Who regularly interacted with the victim? What environments did those interactions occur in? Were any recent changes significant? The goal is not to explain the crime through the victim's choices. The goal is to identify opportunities available to the offender. Some investigations reveal obvious conflicts. Others reveal almost none. Diane's case continued to resist simple explanations. Another challenge emerged as the years advanced. Witness availability. Individuals interviewed during the original investigation had moved away, changed names, or passed on. Detectives attempting follow-up interviews often encountered practical obstacles that simply did not exist during the first months of the investigation. Even when witnesses could be located, memories naturally faded. Human recollection is influenced by time, conversation, and repetition. People often become less certain about details while simultaneously feeling more confident that they remember them correctly. For investigators, this creates a difficult balance. Older memories deserve respect. Contemporaneous documentation deserves greater weight. That is why original interview notes remained indispensable. They captured observations before years of discussion and media coverage could reshape them. The community itself had changed. New residents arrived with little knowledge of the decades-old case. Others who remembered the original headlines occasionally shared stories passed from neighbor to neighbor, each retelling subtly altering the details. Rumor became intertwined with fact. Detectives worked carefully to untangle the two. Public interest in unsolved crimes also evolved. Television documentaries, newspaper retrospectives, podcasts, and online forums introduced Diane's case to audiences far beyond Pasco County. Greater visibility occasionally produced new tips. Most repeated information investigators had already examined. A small number offered fresh avenues for review. Every credible submission received attention,
no matter how much time had passed.
Law enforcement understands an important truth about cold cases. People's willingness to speak changes over time. Relationships end. Friendships weaken. Fear diminishes. Loyalty shifts. Someone who remained silent for years may eventually decide that carrying a secret has become more difficult than revealing it. That possibility never disappears. Investigators therefore encouraged anyone with relevant information, no matter how insignificant it seemed, to come forward. A single overlooked observation can transform an investigation when combined with existing evidence. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science continued to reshape expectations. Across the country, decades-old murders were solved using evidence preserved long before anyone imagined the technology that would eventually analyze it. These successes reinforce the importance of maintaining careful evidence storage and documentation. They also reminded investigators of another reality. Technology can identify. It cannot replace investigation. Even the strongest forensic evidence requires context. Detectives must still establish timelines, verify witness accounts, eliminate alternative explanations, and present a coherent sequence of events supported by admissible evidence. Science answers questions. Investigators determine what those answers mean. For Diane's family, Each announcement of another cold case solved somewhere else carried mixed emotions. Hope, frustration, optimism, heartbreak. Every successful investigation demonstrated that justice remained possible after decades. Every passing year without resolution emphasized that possibility had not yet become reality. Detectives understood those emotions. Many investigators assigned to long-term homicide cases speak of a quiet commitment that extends beyond professional obligation. They inherit promises made by predecessors they may never have met. The names on the reports change. The responsibility does not. In the Augat investigation, that responsibility endured through multiple generations of law enforcement personnel. New detectives studied the work of those who came before them, preserving institutional knowledge while challenging assumptions whenever appropriate. Effective cold case investigation requires both respect for previous efforts and the willingness to question earlier conclusions. Neither quality alone is sufficient. As each review concluded, one fact remained unmistakable. The investigation was still active. Not active in the sense of daily searches and continuous interviews, but active in purpose. Evidence remained preserved. Leads remained subject to evaluation. Developments in forensic science continued to offer potential opportunities. Most importantly, the case had not been forgotten within law enforcement. Unsolved murders occupy a unique place in the criminal justice system. Unlike many offenses, homicide carries no statute of limitations. Time may complicate prosecution, but it does not erase accountability. That principle has sustained investigators through countless cold case reviews across the nation. It sustained them here as well. Somewhere beyond the accumulated reports, laboratory analyses, witness statements, and investigative theories, the truth still existed exactly as it had from the beginning. It remained unaffected by rumor, untouched by speculation, and indifferent to the passage of decades. The challenge was finding a way to reach it. And so the file returned to its place among the agency's active cold cases, not closed, not forgotten, but waiting. Waiting for the next advance in science. Waiting for the next credible tip. Waiting for the next investigator willing to read every page one more time. Because history has shown, again and again, that the difference between an unsolved mystery and a solved homicide is sometimes nothing more than one overlooked detail finally being understood in its proper place. 3 decades after Diane Augat vanished, the investigation had entered a stage few criminal cases ever reach. It was no longer driven by urgency alone. It was driven by endurance. The detectives assigned to the file understood that every review might end exactly where the previous one had, with more questions than answers. Yet they also understood something equally important. Some of the most significant breakthroughs in modern homicide investigations have arrived after years of apparent silence, not because the truth changed, but because investigators learned how to ask better questions. Every cold case eventually becomes a conversation between 2 generations. The first generation collects the evidence. The second tries to understand it differently. Sometimes a third generation finally discovers the connection that everyone else had unknowingly overlooked. That process unfolded repeatedly in homicide units across the country, and the Augat investigation was no exception. Boxes of reports were reopened. Photographs were examined again. Evidence logs were compared against laboratory records. Investigators verified chain of custody documentation, ensuring that every item collected decades earlier remained properly preserved. It was meticulous work, often repetitive, and almost never dramatic. Television crime dramas tend to portray investigations as a succession of breakthroughs. Reality is far quieter. Most days are spent reading, comparing, verifying, and eliminating possibilities one by one. The objective was not merely to revisit old conclusions. It was to challenge them. Every assumption deserved another look. Had investigators correctly interpreted the timeline? Could an overlooked witness have unknowingly observed something significant? Had every reported sighting been evaluated using the same evidentiary standards? Questions like these became the foundation of each new review. One principle guided the detectives throughout the process. Start with what is known. Expand only when supported by evidence. The known facts remained limited but important. Diane disappeared under circumstances that raised concern. Her death became the focus of a homicide investigation. Detectives pursued numerous leads, interviewed witnesses, and preserved available evidence. Despite those efforts, no publicly confirmed suspect was charged, and the case remained officially unsolved. Everything beyond those established facts required careful examination. Investigators resisted the temptation to fill gaps with assumptions. Instead, they treated every unknown as an open question. The missing hours in Diane's final timeline remained among the greatest mysteries. Those unaccounted periods represented opportunities for the offender and obstacles for investigators. Without a complete understanding of where Diane had been and whom she encountered, detectives could only reconstruct possibilities rather than certainties. To narrow those possibilities, they revisited the geography of the case. Maps spread across conference tables once again. Roadways, businesses, residential areas, locations connected to confirmed sightings. The objective was to identify movement rather than motive. How might someone have traveled between relevant locations? Were there routes that minimized visibility? Did the geography suggest familiarity with the area? These questions did not identify an offender, but they helped investigators evaluate competing theories. Geographic analysis has become an increasingly valuable investigative tool over the past several decades. It does not identify guilt. Instead, it reveals patterns that may otherwise remain hidden. A seemingly random series of locations can sometimes reflect deliberate choices when viewed together. Whether such analysis could ultimately resolve Diane's case remained uncertain. Still, every new method deserved consideration. Attention also turned to communication. Not digital communication, which played no role in the original investigation as it would today, but the records, conversations, and documented interactions available from that period. Detectives reviewed what had been preserved, understanding that communication often reveals relationships, expectations, and routines. Just as important was the absence of communication. When people suddenly stop following established patterns, investigators ask why. Was the interruption voluntary, accidental, or imposed by someone else? In homicide investigations, those distinctions can prove critical. The passage of time also altered the investigative environment in unexpected ways. Individuals who had once been reluctant to speak sometimes became more willing. Life circumstances changed. Friendships ended. Personal loyalties shifted. Fear diminished. Detectives have long recognized that information withheld in the immediate aftermath of a crime occasionally surfaces years later, not because new memories emerge, but because old concerns lose their influence. Every credible tip received renewed attention. Some repeated information already documented. Others required fresh inquiry. Each was evaluated against the evidence rather than against expectation. That discipline protected the integrity of the investigation. Public interest in unresolved cases had grown considerably. Documentaries, books, podcasts, and online discussions introduced historic investigations to new audiences. This increased visibility occasionally benefited law enforcement by encouraging witnesses to come forward or prompting renewed media attention. It also introduced challenges. Speculation spread more rapidly than ever before. Unverified claims circulated widely. Rumors, once confined to neighborhoods, could now reach thousands of readers within hours. Investigators remained focused on documentation. Reports. Evidence. Recorded interviews. Laboratory findings. Those sources formed the foundation of the case. Everything else required verification. Another important development involved forensic preservation. Law enforcement agencies increasingly recognized that evidence collected decades earlier might become valuable as scientific techniques improved. As a result, careful storage and documentation became central to cold case strategy. The Augat investigation benefited from that philosophy. Evidence preserved years earlier remained available for future review whenever new analytical methods emerged. Whether those methods would ultimately provide decisive answers could not be predicted. But preserving the opportunity mattered. Families affected by unresolved homicide often describe time differently from investigators. Detectives count years in reviews completed, evidence tested, and leads examined. Families count birthdays missed. Holiday gatherings altered forever. Conversations that never happened. The calendar measures both. Every anniversary of Diane's death reminded those closest to her that justice had not yet caught up with loss. Investigators understood that emotional reality. Many homicide detectives maintain contact with victims' families whenever possible, not because they always have new information to share, but because communication itself reflects an important commitment. The investigation continues. The victim has not been forgotten. Those assurances cannot replace answers. They can, however, reinforce trust that the search has not ended. Within law enforcement, cold cases often become teaching tools as well as active investigations. New detectives study them to understand investigative decision-making, evidence preservation, witness management, and the importance of avoiding premature conclusions. Diane's case, like many unresolved homicides, demonstrated that complex investigations demand patience as much as persistence. Quick answers are satisfying. Accurate answers are essential. That distinction guided every review. As forensic science continued evolving, optimism remained cautious. Technology has solved many historic murders. It has also confirmed that some cases contain too little recoverable evidence to provide definitive conclusions through science alone. Investigators therefore balanced hope with realism. No single advancement could guarantee success. Instead, progress would likely depend upon multiple factors converging. Preserved evidence, reliable documentation, credible witness information, careful analysis. Together, these elements offered the greatest possibility of eventual resolution. Whether that resolution would arrive in months or decades remained unknown. What investigators refused to accept, however, was the idea that the passage of time alone determined the outcome. History consistently disproved that belief. Again and again, homicide cases once considered impossible had yielded answers because someone persisted. Someone reread the reports. Someone retested the evidence. Someone noticed the detail everyone else had overlooked. That possibility remained alive here. Somewhere within the accumulated record of Diane Augat's final days, investigators believed the essential truth still waited, unchanged since the moment the crime occurred. The reports described it imperfectly. The evidence reflected only fragments of it. Witnesses remembered pieces of it. Science continued searching for traces of it. None of those elements alone completed the picture. Together, they formed an unfinished investigation, one sustained not by certainty, but by the conviction that unanswered questions deserve patient, disciplined pursuit until every reasonable avenue has been exhausted. And in this case, despite the passing decades, investigators had not yet reached that point. There is a quiet misconception about unsolved murders. Many people imagine that once a case goes cold, it simply disappears into a warehouse where no one ever looks at it again. The reality is far more complicated. A cold case is not abandoned. It exists in a state of suspension, waiting for something to change. Sometimes that change comes from science, sometimes from a witness, sometimes from a detective willing to challenge assumptions that had remained untested for years. By the time Diane Augat's homicide entered its third decade without an arrest, the investigation had become less about speed and more about discipline. Every review followed the same principle: separate what was known from what was merely believed. That distinction mattered. Cases built on assumptions eventually collapse. Cases built on evidence endure. The known facts had remained remarkably consistent over the years. Diane disappeared under circumstances that prompted concern. Her death was investigated as a homicide. Detectives conducted extensive interviews, examined physical evidence, and pursued numerous investigative leads. Despite those efforts, no publicly identified suspect had been charged, and the case remained officially unresolved. Everything beyond those established facts required careful scrutiny. Investigators often describe cold case work as an exercise in subtraction rather than addition. Instead of searching for dramatic new revelations, they gradually eliminate explanations that no longer fit the evidence. As impossible theories disappear, the remaining possibilities become more significant. That process demands patience. And patience is rarely visible to the public. For every headline announcing that a decades-old murder has finally been solved, there are thousands of hours spent reviewing files that never produce immediate results. Detectives understand this reality. Success often emerges only after years of seemingly routine work. The Augat investigation reflected that philosophy. Evidence inventories were compared against laboratory reports. Interview summaries were reviewed alongside original transcripts. Photographs were examined for contextual details that earlier investigators may have considered unimportant. Sometimes a background object in an image acquires significance decades later. Sometimes it does not. Every possibility deserved consideration. One recurring question continued to shape the investigation. Who, if anyone, had knowledge of Diane's movements during the final confirmed period before her disappearance? The answer was not straightforward. People move through communities every day, interacting with friends, acquaintances, employees, and strangers. Most encounters leave no lasting impression. Yet in homicide investigations, those ordinary interactions suddenly become essential. Investigators reconstructed routine rather than exception. Where did Diane regularly spend time? Who would reasonably expect to encounter her? Which interactions were confirmed, and which existed only through rumor? Separating routine from anomaly became increasingly important. Routine explains opportunity. Anomaly sometimes explains motive. The detectives also examined whether advances in criminal profiling could offer useful insights. Behavioral analysis is often misunderstood. It does not identify offenders or replace evidence. Instead, it helps investigators evaluate whether observable actions suggest planning, impulsivity, familiarity with a location, or other characteristics relevant to the investigation. Such analysis always remains tentative. Behavioral assessments guide questions. They do not answer them. In Diane's case, the available evidence suggested complexity rather than simplicity. The circumstances surrounding the disposal of evidence indicated deliberate actions after the crime. Exactly what those actions revealed about the offender remained open to interpretation. Investigators therefore avoided drawing conclusions unsupported by corroborating evidence. The community, meanwhile, had changed dramatically since the original investigation. Businesses familiar to early witnesses had closed or relocated. Roadways had been redesigned. Residential developments expanded into areas that once looked entirely different. Places capable of triggering memories gradually disappeared from the landscape. This transformation created unexpected investigative challenges. Witnesses attempting to recall events often rely upon physical landmarks. When those landmarks vanish, memory becomes more difficult to organize. Detectives therefore relied heavily upon historical maps, archived photographs, and contemporaneous documentation to reconstruct the environment as it existed during the investigation's earliest days. Context matters. A location viewed today may bear little resemblance to the same location decades earlier. Understanding that difference helps investigators avoid modern assumptions about historic events. As technology advanced, information sharing between agencies also improved. Databases became more comprehensive. Communication became faster. Records that once required weeks to obtain could now be accessed much more efficiently. These developments benefited cold case investigations nationwide, allowing detectives to compare evidence and investigative information across jurisdictions with far greater ease than had been possible during the original inquiry. Every advancement increased opportunity. None guaranteed resolution. That reality remained central to the investigation. Detectives resisted the temptation to interpret technological progress as certainty. Science can strengthen evidence already collected, but it cannot create evidence where none exists. Successful prosecutions still depend upon the careful integration of forensic findings, witness testimony, investigative documentation, and legal standards. Each element supports the others. Remove one, and the entire structure becomes more fragile. The passage of time introduced another subtle challenge. Perspective. Investigators who first worked the case experienced the events in real time. Those who inherited the file decades later viewed everything through documentation rather than direct observation. Neither perspective was inherently superior. The original detectives understood the atmosphere surrounding the investigation. Later detectives brought analytical distance unshaped by early assumptions. Combining those perspectives became one of the investigation's greatest strengths. Institutional memory also played an important role. Retired investigators occasionally shared insights unavailable in official reports. Why one lead had received particular attention. Why another had been set aside. What impressions remained after interviews that written summaries could never fully capture. Such conversations rarely replaced documented evidence. They sometimes provided valuable context. The distinction was carefully maintained. Throughout every review, detectives remained conscious of the ethical responsibility accompanying homicide investigations. An unresolved case naturally invites public speculation. Names circulate. Rumors spread. People become associated with crimes based upon coincidence rather than evidence. Law enforcement therefore maintained a disciplined focus on verifiable facts. Protecting the innocent remains just as important as identifying the guilty. The criminal justice system depends upon that balance. For Diane's family, however, legal principles existed alongside emotional reality. Every year without resolution represented another year of uncertainty. Another year in which questions outnumbered answers. Families affected by homicide frequently describe this experience as living without a final chapter. Life continues, yet the story never truly ends. Investigators understood that burden. Many detectives involved in long-term homicide cases speak not only of solving crimes, but of restoring narrative. Who was responsible? Why did it happen? Can accountability finally replace uncertainty? Those questions define justice as much as courtroom proceedings. Across the United States, numerous cold cases have demonstrated that persistence matters. Some have been solved after 30 years. Others after 50. In many instances, the decisive breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. A preserved DNA sample. A forgotten witness. An overlooked report. A connection that earlier investigators simply lacked the tools to recognize. These examples encouraged continued review of the Augat investigation. Not because success was guaranteed, because possibility remained. As another anniversary approached, the case continued occupying its unique place within the agency's cold case files. Not forgotten. Not abandoned. Not resolved. Instead, it remained suspended between history and hope, supported by carefully preserved evidence, meticulous documentation, and the determination of investigators unwilling to mistake the passage of time for the disappearance of truth. Somewhere beyond the reports, Beyond the laboratory examinations and beyond the decades of unanswered questions, the events of Diane Augat's final day still existed exactly as they had unfolded. Every action, every decision, every encounter. The investigation sought only one thing: to replace uncertainty with evidence, to replace speculation with fact. And one day, if the evidence should finally allow it, to replace an enduring mystery with an answer worthy of the victim whose name remained at the center of the file. By the fourth decade, the investigation had entered a phase that only a small number of homicide cases ever reach. Time had stripped away urgency, but it had also stripped away illusion. Detectives no longer expected a dramatic confession or a witness suddenly remembering every missing detail with perfect clarity. Instead, they relied on a quieter form of persistence, one built upon documentation, scientific progress, and the belief that truth has a remarkable ability to outlast silence. Every cold case exists between two competing forces. One is time. The other is evidence. Time erodes memory, scatters witnesses, alters landscapes, and changes communities beyond recognition. Evidence, when preserved correctly, resists those changes. It waits with extraordinary patience for investigators to develop the tools necessary to understand it. That balance defined the Diane Augat investigation. The file had become substantial. Thousands of pages documented interviews, laboratory examinations, investigative memoranda, evidence inventories, and follow-up reviews. To an outsider, the sheer volume could appear overwhelming. To experienced detectives, however, every page represented a decision already made, or one that deserved reconsideration. Cold case investigations are rarely linear. They move backward as often as forward. One newly examined report may require investigators to revisit interviews conducted decades earlier. A single clarification can reshape how an entire sequence of events is understood, not because history changes, but because understanding improves. The detectives approached Diane's case with precisely that philosophy. Rather than asking, "What new evidence do we have?" they increasingly asked, "What existing evidence have we not fully understood?" It is a subtle difference. It is also one of the most important distinctions in modern homicide investigation. Across the country, numerous unresolved murders have eventually been solved because investigators interpreted old evidence differently, often with the assistance of advances in forensic science or improved analytical techniques. The evidence itself had remained unchanged. Human understanding had evolved. That possibility remained alive here. Every preserved item retained potential investigative value. Whether that potential could ultimately identify the offender remained uncertain. Investigators also considered another factor often overlooked outside law enforcement: offenders change. The individual responsible for a homicide committed decades earlier may no longer resemble the person investigators originally imagined. Circumstances evolve. Relationships shift. Careers begin and end. Health changes. Priorities change. Some offenders spend years believing they escaped accountability forever. Others live with the constant fear that tomorrow may finally bring a knock at the door. Investigators cannot rely upon either assumption. Instead, they continue examining evidence independent of speculation regarding an offender's psychology. Still, criminal behavior sometimes reveals patterns extending beyond the offense itself. Actions taken before the crime. Actions immediately afterward. Actions during the investigation. Each carries potential significance if supported by evidence. The challenge lies in distinguishing meaningful behavior from coincidence. That distinction remained central throughout every review. Public attention periodically returned to the case whenever media outlets revisited notable unsolved homicides. Each renewed discussion generated familiar questions. Could modern DNA technology solve the case? Had investigators identified a likely suspect? Was their information being withheld from the public? The answers remained measured. Law enforcement generally protects investigative details for practical reasons. Certain facts are known only to investigators and the offender. Preserving those details allows detectives to evaluate future statements, confessions, or witness information for authenticity. Not every fact can be discussed publicly. That principle applies regardless of how much time has passed. The existence of withheld information should not be mistaken for hidden certainty. Rather, it reflects standard investigative practice. Within the investigative team, documentation became increasingly valuable as personnel changed. Every detective inherits more than reports. They inherit responsibility. A homicide file is not simply paperwork. It represents an unfinished obligation to the victim's family, and the justice system itself. The detectives who first responded to Diane's disappearance could not have predicted how many years the investigation would continue. Those who later assumed responsibility recognized that they were building upon work performed by predecessors whose efforts deserved careful respect. Fresh perspectives remained essential. So did institutional continuity. The combination strengthened the investigation. One recurring exercise involved reconstructing the chronology without relying upon conclusions drawn during previous reviews. This approach served an important purpose. Assumptions have a tendency to become embedded within investigations over time. Reconstructing events from primary evidence alone helps identify whether accepted interpretations remain justified. Sometimes they do. Occasionally, they do not. Such reviews rarely produce immediate breakthroughs. They improve accuracy. Accuracy matters, especially in homicide cases where every conclusion may eventually be tested before a jury. Investigators also remained attentive to developments beyond the immediate case. Advances in forensic genetics, digital record management, and evidence preservation continued influencing cold case methodology nationwide. While every investigation presents unique challenges, improvements in one case often inspire renewed examination of another. The criminal justice community learns collectively. Every solved cold case contributes knowledge applicable elsewhere. This broader perspective reinforced a simple principle. Never assume an investigation has reached its final limit. Scientific capability continues evolving. Analytical methods continue improving. Investigative collaboration continues expanding. Possibility, therefore, remains. For Diane's family, however, possibility could never replace certainty. Hope and uncertainty often coexist in unresolved homicide cases. Each new technological advancement offers encouragement. Each year without definitive answers brings renewed disappointment. Investigators understood this emotional reality. Communication with victims' families requires honesty. False optimism serves no one. Neither does unwarranted pessimism. The responsible position lies between the two. Continue working. Continue evaluating. Continue preserving evidence. Continue listening. These commitments formed the foundation of the investigation's long-term strategy. Meanwhile, the passage of decades subtly transformed the meaning of the case itself. For younger investigators entering law enforcement, Diane Augat's murder was no longer a recent tragedy. It had become history. Yet history in criminal investigation carries unusual characteristics. Unlike historical events studied for understanding alone, unresolved homicides remain active questions awaiting answers. The calendar changes. The obligation does not. This distinction motivated every new detective assigned to the file. They were not simply studying the past. They were preparing for the possibility that tomorrow's evidence, tomorrow's witness, or tomorrow's scientific advancement might finally illuminate events that had remained hidden for decades. Such patience requires discipline. It also requires humility. Investigators must accept that some questions cannot yet be answered while refusing to conclude they never will be. That balance defines successful cold case work. As the investigation continued, one principle remained unchanged from the earliest days. Begin with evidence. End with evidence. Everything else occupies the uncertain space between. Rumor fades. Speculation shifts. Public attention rises and falls. Evidence alone possesses the stability necessary to withstand time, scrutiny, and legal examination. That understanding sustained the Augad investigation through years when little appeared to change. Because beneath the surface, careful work continued. Reports were reread. Evidence remained protected. Leads were documented. New information, however limited, received evaluation. The file remained open not because investigators possessed all the answers, but because they understood that unanswered questions deserve continued attention whenever reasonable opportunities remain. Somewhere beyond the accumulated documentation lay a complete sequence of events known only to those directly involved on the day Diane Augat lost her life. Investigators possessed fragments of that sequence. The community remembered fragments. Her family carried different fragments still. The task was, and remains, bringing those fragments together in a manner supported not by assumption, but by evidence strong enough to speak with certainty. Until that day arrives, the investigation stands as a testament to persistence, quiet, methodical, and unwavering in its commitment to pursuing truth wherever the evidence may eventually lead. There is an uncomfortable truth that every veteran homicide investigator eventually learns. A murder is committed in a single moment, but its consequences unfold for decades. The violence ends quickly. The investigation does not. Long after the crime scene has been processed, the evidence cataloged, and the headlines replaced by newer tragedies, the unanswered questions remain exactly where they began, waiting for someone to find the one connection that has escaped every previous search. That reality shaped the Diane Augat investigation more than any single lead or forensic examination. The case had survived changes in technology, changes in investigative philosophy, and changes in personnel. Detectives came and went. Supervisors retired. Evidence was transferred from one secure storage facility to another under carefully documented procedures. Through every transition, one objective remained constant. Find the truth. Not the most likely explanation. Not the most popular theory. The truth supported by evidence. Cold case investigators often describe their work as an exercise in disciplined curiosity. Every accepted conclusion must remain open to reconsideration if new information emerges. This willingness to question earlier assumptions distinguishes effective investigations from simple repetition. The Augat file reflected that approach. Each review began by identifying what could be stated with confidence. Then came the unknowns. The unknowns mattered just as much. Perhaps more. Unknowns define the direction of future investigation. Among those unresolved questions, one continued to dominate every discussion. What happened during the final period before Diane's death? Investigators possessed fragments. Confirmed observations. Documented interviews. Physical evidence recovered during the investigation. Yet, no complete reconstruction of those final hours could be established with the level of certainty required in a criminal prosecution. Those missing pieces influenced every subsequent decision. Without them, motive remained uncertain. Opportunity remained uncertain. The precise sequence of events remained uncertain. Detectives therefore concentrated on strengthening the portions of the timeline that could be verified independently. This process may appear modest. It is not. Every verified fact limits the number of possible explanations. Every eliminated possibility narrows the investigation. Progress in homicide work is often measured not by dramatic discoveries, but by steadily reducing uncertainty. Another recurring area of analysis involved witness reliability. Time affects every witness differently. Some remember isolated details with remarkable clarity while forgetting broader context. Others recall overall events accurately, but struggle with precise chronology. Investigators therefore compared statements against objective documentation whenever possible. Receipts, official records, contemporaneous notes, recorded interviews. The objective was never to challenge honest witnesses unnecessarily. It was to distinguish memory from evidence. That distinction protects both the investigation and the people participating in it. Throughout the years, investigators also evaluated whether advances in forensic methodology justified additional examinations of preserved evidence. Scientific innovation has transformed criminal investigation in ways few could have anticipated when Diane's case first began. Laboratory techniques became more sensitive. Analytical standards became more rigorous. Databases expanded dramatically. Each advancement created another opportunity to revisit evidence collected decades earlier. Opportunity, however, is not certainty. Detectives remained careful not to promise outcomes beyond what the evidence could support. Across the country, some cold cases have been solved through modern forensic analysis. Others have not. Every investigation presents unique evidentiary challenges. The Augat investigation was no exception. Within law enforcement, unresolved homicide cases frequently become collaborative efforts extending beyond individual agencies. Detectives consult forensic specialists, prosecutors, crime analysts, and investigators experienced in reviewing historic cases. Fresh perspectives help identify investigative avenues that earlier teams may not have considered. Collaboration strengthens objectivity. Different professional backgrounds encourage different questions. Sometimes those questions reveal overlooked possibilities. Sometimes they reinforce earlier conclusions. Both outcomes possess value. The investigation also demonstrated the importance of documentation. Reports prepared decades earlier continued guiding present-day analysis. Their accuracy mattered. Their completeness mattered. The decisions made by original investigators influenced every subsequent review. Cold case detectives often express profound respect for meticulous record-keeping. Well-documented investigations preserve opportunities that otherwise disappear with time. The public rarely sees this aspect of homicide investigation. Attention naturally focuses on arrests and courtroom verdicts. Yet many successful prosecutions begin with reports written years earlier by investigators who understood that someone else might eventually continue their work. That understanding formed part of the Augat investigation's enduring foundation. Outside the investigative process, the passage of time affected public perception. Younger generations encountered the case through retrospective news coverage, documentaries, and discussions of unresolved crimes rather than through contemporary reporting. For them, Diane's murder belonged to history. For those directly affected, it remained part of the present. This difference in perspective illustrates one of the defining characteristics of unsolved homicide. The calendar advances. Grief follows its own schedule. Families often describe unresolved loss as fundamentally different from bereavement accompanied by answers. Knowing what happened cannot erase tragedy. Not knowing ensures that tragedy never fully settles. Investigators recognize this distinction. Many detectives involved in long-term cases speak of responsibility extending beyond legal outcomes. Every review, every evidence examination, every follow-up interview communicates a simple message. The victim still matters. That principle has sustained countless cold case investigations. It sustained this one as well. As forensic science continued evolving, optimism remained measured. Technology provides tools. Investigators provide interpretation. Courts require proof. Each element depends upon the others. No single advancement can replace careful investigative work. Conversely, even the most diligent investigation benefits from scientific progress capable of revealing previously hidden information. The relationship is complementary, not competitive. Another important lesson emerged from decades of reviewing unresolved homicides nationwide. Persistence often succeeds where urgency cannot. Initial investigations operate under intense pressure. Time is limited. Information changes rapidly. Cold case investigations operate differently. They emphasize patience, documentation, verification, analytical discipline. These qualities sometimes reveal connections overlooked during the understandable urgency of the original inquiry. Whether such a connection remained hidden within Diane Augat's case could not be known. Investigators nevertheless continued searching. Every credible lead received evaluation. Every significant development in forensic capability prompted renewed consideration of preserved evidence. Every anniversary reinforced the commitment to continue. Not because resolution was guaranteed, because possibility remained. One principle guided every stage of the investigation. Evidence first. Interpretation second. Speculation last. Maintaining that order protects both justice and truth. Without it, investigations become vulnerable to confirmation bias, rumor, and premature conclusions. With it, even difficult cases retain their integrity. As the file continued growing through successive reviews, detectives understood that they were participating in something larger than a single investigation. They were preserving accountability across time. The individual responsible for Diane Augat's death had benefited from the uncertainty surrounding the case. Investigators refused to allow that uncertainty to become permanence without exhausting every reasonable avenue available. History has repeatedly demonstrated that decades-old homicide investigations can reach resolution when persistence, science, and careful documentation converge. No one could predict whether or when such convergence might occur here. What remained certain was the commitment. The evidence would remain preserved. The file would remain available for review. New information would continue receiving careful evaluation. The search for truth would continue, not because the passage of years demanded it, but because justice does. And somewhere beyond the reports, the evidence inventories, the witness statements, and the countless hours invested by generations of investigators, the complete story of Diane Augat's final day still existed, unchanged by time, untouched by rumor, and waiting for the moment when evidence, rather than speculation, might finally reveal it in full. Nearly 4 decades had passed, yet one reality remained unchanged. The events that ended Diane Augat's life had already happened in full. Somewhere, in a sequence of actions known completely only to the person or people directly involved, every answer already existed. Investigators did not need to invent the truth. They needed to uncover it, piece by piece, from evidence that had survived the passage of time. That distinction lies at the heart of every unresolved homicide. Truth is fixed. Understanding is not. Throughout the years, the Augat investigation evolved alongside the broader transformation of criminal investigation in the United States. What began as a traditional homicide inquiry eventually became part of an era increasingly defined by scientific advancement, interagency cooperation, and systematic cold case review. Detectives understood that while technology could never replace careful investigative work, it could illuminate evidence that earlier generations simply lacked the ability to interpret. Accordingly, the philosophy surrounding the case continued to emphasize preservation. Every report, every photograph, every laboratory submission, every evidence inventory, every documented interview. Together they formed a historical record whose value often increased rather than diminished with time. Unlike memory, documentation does not gradually change. It preserves observations exactly as they were recorded. For investigators reviewing the case decades later, this consistency proved invaluable. Cold case detectives frequently describe their work as reconstructing a puzzle without knowing whether every piece still exists. Some evidence remains intact. Some evidence may never have been collected because its significance was impossible to recognize at the time. Some questions remain unanswered because the available facts simply cannot support definitive conclusions. Accepting those limitations is not a sign of failure. It is a requirement of honest investigation. Throughout successive reviews, detectives carefully distinguished between established evidence and investigative possibilities. That discipline protected the integrity of the case. It also ensured that future developments, whether forensic or testimonial, could be evaluated without being constrained by unsupported assumptions formed years earlier. The investigation repeatedly returned to several enduring questions. Could preserved forensic evidence benefit from emerging scientific methods? Might someone who had remained silent finally decide to speak? Could information held by another agency unexpectedly intersect with the existing file? Each possibility justified continued attention. None justified certainty before evidence. This careful balance between persistence and restraint defines responsible homicide investigation. The criminal justice system demands more than suspicion. It demands proof. Investigators therefore measured progress not by headlines, but by preparation. Was the evidence properly preserved? Were investigative decisions fully documented? Could every conclusion be explained and defended if the case ultimately reached court? These practical questions occupied countless hours behind the scenes. The public rarely witnessed that work. Yet it formed the foundation upon which every future opportunity depended. Meanwhile, developments in forensic science continued reshaping expectations nationwide. Cases once believed permanently beyond resolution occasionally reached successful prosecutions after decades of uncertainty. Improved DNA analysis, enhanced laboratory techniques, and expanding investigative databases demonstrated that time does not necessarily weaken every homicide investigation. Sometimes it strengthens one, provided the evidence has been preserved with extraordinary care. That realization reinforced the importance of decisions made during the earliest days of the Augat investigation. Evidence cannot be recollected decades later. Its preservation during the original inquiry created possibilities unavailable to investigators working cases where crucial material had been lost. Whether those possibilities would ultimately produce definitive answers remained uncertain. Nevertheless, they remained possibilities. Within law enforcement, unresolved homicide investigations often serve another important purpose. They remind investigators that every decision made today may influence another detective many years into the future. Clear documentation, careful evidence handling, objective reporting. These practices benefit not only the current investigation but every future review. The Augat case illustrated this principle repeatedly. Each new detective inherited not simply a file, but a professional obligation carefully passed from one generation of investigators to the next. Institutional continuity became one of the investigation's greatest strengths. Knowledge accumulated. Methods improved. Perspective evolved. Yet the central mission remained identical. Determine what happened. Identify who is responsible if the evidence allows. Present conclusions capable of surviving legal scrutiny. Outside the investigative environment, Diane's case continued occupying a unique place within discussions of unresolved crimes. For many members of the public, it represented the unsettling reality that not every homicide reaches a courtroom. Some investigations extend across decades despite sustained effort. This fact can appear discouraging. It also highlights the extraordinary complexity surrounding certain crimes. The absence of resolution should never be mistaken for the absence of investigation. Countless hours of professional work often continue long after media attention fades. Families understand this distinction perhaps better than anyone. Public interest rises and falls. Their experience remains constant. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering. The unanswered questions accompany them through each passing year. Investigators recognize that burden. Although evidence determines investigative decisions, empathy shapes investigative commitment. Victims are never reduced to file numbers. Behind every report lies an interrupted life. Behind every evidence label stands a family waiting for answers. That understanding sustains many detectives through the repetitive and often invisible work required by cold case investigations. Another characteristic of long-term homicide investigations is humility. Experienced detectives understand that certainty must always remain proportional to evidence. The temptation to force conclusions grows stronger as years pass. Responsible investigators resist that temptation. Better an unanswered question than an unsupported accusation. This principle protects both justice and public confidence. Throughout the decades, Diane Augat's investigation remained guided by that standard. The case continued because unanswered questions remained. The evidence continued receiving attention because future developments could not be predicted. History repeatedly demonstrated that unexpected breakthroughs sometimes emerge after years of apparent inactivity. A witness comes forward. A forensic technique improves. An overlooked document acquires new meaning. None of these possibilities can be scheduled. All require preparation. Preparation became the defining characteristic of the investigation. Everything preserved. Everything documented. Everything organized for the possibility that tomorrow might finally provide what yesterday could not. As another year passed, the case remained officially unresolved. That status reflected the available evidence, not the determination of those who continued examining it. The search had changed over time. It no longer relied upon urgency. It relied upon endurance. Endurance measured not in headlines or public attention, but in careful reviews, disciplined analysis, scientific curiosity, and professional commitment extending across generations. Somewhere beyond the reports, beyond the evidence inventories, beyond the witness interviews, and beyond every investigative theory, the complete truth remained exactly where it had always been. It had witnessed the passing of decades without changing. The challenge belonged not to time, but to discovery. And so the investigation continued, not driven by certainty, but by responsibility, not sustained by speculation, but by evidence, not because answers were guaranteed, but because unresolved homicide demands continued effort whenever reasonable paths remain. For investigators, that commitment represents the final promise made to every victim. The passage of years may reshape almost everything else. It does not erase that promise. Nearly 4 decades have passed since Diane Augat's name first appeared in police reports, and despite every interview, every laboratory examination, every review of preserved evidence, and every generation of detectives who have carried the investigation forward, one truth remains unchanged. Her homicide has never been officially solved. That reality is difficult to accept. Not because investigators stopped looking. Not because the case was forgotten. But because some crimes refuse to surrender their answers, even after years of determined effort. The story of Diane Augat is not ultimately defined by mystery alone. It is defined by persistence. Every cold case represents a test of the criminal justice system's willingness to remember. Public attention inevitably fades. Headlines disappear. New tragedies replace old ones. Communities change. Yet the responsibility to pursue justice does not expire. In homicide investigations, there is no statute of limitations. The calendar continues moving forward, but the obligation remains exactly where it began. That principle has shaped every review of Diane's case. Every detective assigned to the investigation inherited more than a collection of reports. They inherited unanswered questions. They inherited commitments made to a victim's family. They inherited evidence carefully preserved by investigators who understood that future science might reveal what contemporary methods could not. In many ways, that quiet transfer of responsibility is one of the least visible yet most remarkable aspects of homicide investigation. Cases survive people. Officers retire. Supervisors change. Entire investigative teams are replaced over time. The evidence remains. Waiting. Carefully documented. Properly preserved. Ready to be examined again whenever new opportunities emerge. Throughout the United States, history has repeatedly demonstrated that patience sometimes succeeds where urgency cannot. Numerous homicide investigations once considered impossible have eventually reached resolution decades later through advances in forensic science, renewed witness cooperation, or careful re-examination of long-preserved evidence. Those successes provide cautious optimism. They also provide perspective. Every solved cold case reminds investigators that certainty should never be confused with inevitability. Some investigations eventually produce sufficient evidence for prosecution. Others do not. Each case depends upon its own facts, its own evidence, and its own unique circumstances. The Augat investigation continues to be evaluated according to those standards. No responsible investigator promises outcomes unsupported by evidence. Instead, they preserve possibility. That distinction matters. Hope is meaningful only when it remains grounded in reality. For Diane's family, and for those who knew her, the passage of time has undoubtedly changed many things. Lives moved forward because they had no alternative. Children became adults. Communities evolved. Familiar places disappeared. Yet loss possesses an unusual quality. It adapts. It never entirely leaves. Families affected by unresolved homicide often describe living with two parallel realities. One is everyday life, filled with ordinary responsibilities and routines. The other is the unanswered question that quietly accompanies every anniversary, every birthday, and every milestone. The question is simple. What happened? The answer remains incomplete. Investigators understand that emotional burden better than many people realize. Behind every evidence inventory lies a human story. Behind every investigative memorandum stands a life interrupted. The reports document facts. Families remember people. Both perspectives are essential. That understanding explains why experienced homicide detectives speak not only about solving crimes, but about restoring truth. Justice is not measured solely by arrests. It is measured by accuracy, by accountability, by ensuring that conclusions rest upon evidence capable of withstanding the highest level of scrutiny. Anything less risks replacing one tragedy with another. That commitment to evidence has remained constant throughout the Augat investigation. Rumors have surfaced over the years. Speculation has circulated. Theories have come and gone. None of those can substitute for proof. In the criminal justice system, evidence, not assumption, must carry the final word. That principle protects everyone. It protects victims. It protects families. It protects innocent individuals from unsupported accusation. And if sufficient evidence is ever developed, it strengthens the pursuit of justice against whoever may ultimately be responsible. As forensic science continues evolving, opportunities may continue to emerge that were unimaginable when the investigation first began. Laboratories possess analytical capabilities today that earlier generations of investigators could scarcely have anticipated. Digital record management, forensic databases, and improved biological testing have transformed the landscape of criminal investigation. Whether those advancements will someday answer the remaining questions in Diane's case cannot be predicted. Investigators nevertheless preserve every reasonable opportunity. Because history has repeatedly demonstrated that truth sometimes waits longer than anyone expects. The broader significance of Diane Augat's case extends beyond one investigation. It serves as a reminder of the importance of meticulous evidence preservation, careful documentation, professional objectivity, interagency cooperation, scientific advancement. Every one of these elements contributes to the pursuit of justice, not only in one case, but across countless investigations throughout the country. Cold cases teach investigators patience. They teach humility. Perhaps most importantly, they teach that unanswered does not necessarily mean unanswerable. There is an important difference. The first describes the present. The second attempts to predict the future. Responsible investigators avoid predictions. They focus on preparation. That preparation continues. Evidence remains secured. Documentation remains available. New information continues to be evaluated whenever it emerges. The investigation remains open to legitimate opportunities supported by fact. And that is where the story stands today. Not with a dramatic courtroom verdict. Not with a public confession. Not with certainty. But with a file that continues to represent one of Florida's enduring unsolved homicide investigations. Somewhere, the complete sequence of events surrounding Diane Augat's final day exists exactly as it unfolded. Time has not altered those events. It has only made them more difficult to reconstruct. For investigators, that distinction continues to matter. Truth does not become less true because decades have passed. It simply becomes more difficult to prove. Yet history has shown that difficult is not the same as impossible. Many investigations once believed destined to remain unanswered have eventually reached resolution through persistence, science, and careful attention to evidence. Whether Diane Augat's case will one day join that list remains unknown. Until then, it stands as a solemn reminder that every unresolved homicide leaves behind more than an unfinished investigation. It leaves a family still waiting, a community still remembering, detectives still preserving the possibility that tomorrow's technology, tomorrow's witness, or tomorrow's insight may illuminate what yesterday could not. The final chapter has not yet been written. Perhaps one day it will be. If that day comes, it will not be because time finally revealed the truth. It will be because investigators, scientists, witnesses, and the justice system remained committed to searching for it long after everyone else stopped looking. And until that moment arrives, Diane Augat's case remains exactly what every unresolved homicide deserves to be, not forgotten, not abandoned, but remembered with the patience, integrity, and determination that every pursuit of justice requires.